Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is my review of all three sides of the Modhouse Tungsten. These are open-back, full-size, planar magnetic headphones that range in price from about $1,500 US for the single-sided version up to about $2,300 US for the fully tricked-out double-sided version. These were kind loans to me from Ryan at Modhouse Audio. I have talked to Ryan extensively about his designs and asked him some questions and given him some initial thoughts and impressions on this, but to his credit, Ryan has done an excellent job of not trying to unduly influence my opinion in this review. He's not paying me, I am not keeping these. The links that you will see in the description down below where you can buy these from Modhouse will be just that, links there for your convenience. They are not affiliate links or anything of that nature. Hopefully this review will be releasing the day before the Modhouse website says that they will start accepting orders for these again. You should see this video publicly on March 28th of 2024, and the website says they will be accepting orders again beginning on March 29th. Real quick, my takeaways on these headphones are that the single-sided version here is a really solid lower hi-fi headphone. Maybe not technically the best at its price point, but it has a presentation that is unique and finds its own little niche in the market if you have the amp to drive it. The double-sided version is arguably the second best buy at $2,000 US in the headphone market right now if you have the amp to drive it. And I tried over a dozen headphone amplifiers because I have them here now and I might have a problem. Okay, but find out why I say all of this craziness right after shameless self-promotion.
Hi, I'm Wave Theory's human companion, and he wants you to know that your support of this YouTube channel helps keep the reviews coming. If you enjoy Wave Theory's honest, thorough style, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the links in the description below to sign up for the Patreon or send him a tip through PayPal. All right, enjoy the musings.
We are again going to be here a while because there is a lot of ground to cover. As I mentioned at the top, I have over a dozen headphone amplifiers in-house right now that just because I either own them or they are on loan for review, it just happened in this point in history that everything kind of came together, that I have that many amps on hand to try these very amp-demanding headphones on. So I will spend a fair amount of time in this review reporting on amp pairings for these things. I also will spend a lot of time on the sound and will compare them to other headphones around their price and higher so that we can talk about where the tungsten, both of the tungstens, the single-sided and the double-sided, fit into the headphone market at large. So the bulk of this video is going to be about those three things: the sound, where they fit in the market, and then amp pairings. I will spend a little bit of time on the build and the specs, but I don't want to spend a whole lot of time there. But we are going to start with the build and the specs and the features that comes with the price and all of that too. So again, I will timestamp all of this out, jump around as you feel necessary for your needs. Okay. This is the single-sided version. It is $1,500 US starting price. Okay, the double-sided version, again, goes to about $2,000 starting price, can go up to about $2,300 with some additional options. This right here, I think, is known as the Mimic Edition for Mimic Audio, and that one is the $2,300 one that I know of in there. So they are pretty much built the same, and single-sided versus double-sided refers to the magnet structure. They are planar magnetic driver headphones, and single-sided means that the magnet array of the planar magnetic driver is on one side, the side opposite your ears, okay, on the single-sided version. The double-sided version has magnets that are on both sides, which equates to having more magnetic force to place on the planar magnetic membrane, which does give a little bit tighter driver control. So that does impact the sound. So I will compare these two sonically later on in the video too. All right. But other than that, the physical build is pretty much the same. They are 520 grams of mass. The mass is well distributed on the head and using the headband here. So even though that sounds a little bit on the heavy side, I really did not have any kind of comfort comfort issues with these. The clamp is middling in its force, maybe a little bit middle low, but it's just tight enough to prevent them from sliding around on the head very much. They have a lot of range of motion here and also in this way, and it's also very quiet. There's no squeaking or anything like that. We have a head size adjustment mechanism here. The build is the same again on both versions of the headphone. Okay, we have a plastic here in the housing. It looks like it's 3D printed. That may not be true, but it's a pretty rigid, tough plastic. I think much like the Sennheiser HD600 series, even though that is a plastic construction, it's a quality plastic construction that is going to last for a good while. This part feels like metal though. Maybe it isn't, but anyway. Another cool feature here is the pads are held on by a magnet system. It just uses the magnets to hold this on. You line them up based on the screw holes here on the back. We have these little notches that fit onto the screws here, just kind of get everything lined up. You just hold it on there. You feel the magnetic field pull it in until it eventually gets lined up, and then when you can no longer twist it, it snaps right into place there. Okay, the pads are made by ZMF, but the magnetic rings that are on there are added by Modhouse because ZMF's pads just fit on with flaps of leather that go over the wood cups there. So the magnetic addition to this is a Modhouse feature. So if you want to roll pads on these headphones, it's really easy to do because of the magnetic mounting system. You do have to buy the pads directly from Modhouse. All right, the other thing to talk about feature and build-wise is we have dual 3.5 millimeter cup entry here for the cabling system. These are recessed jacks that will accept any kind of plug that has a barrel diameter up to 10 millimeters. All right, and so, and they are also angled forward a fair amount. I can show you here. Here is the stock cable made by Skedra at Viking Weave Cables. Okay, it's about 6 feet, a little, or roughly 2 meters long for those of you not on the English system. Stock comes with the XLR here, although I think you might have the option for 1/4 inch if you prefer. Dual 3.5 millimeter here, and just to plug these in real quick to show you what I mean here. Okay, the cabling angle, or the cables angle forward a little bit like so, and that helps keep them off of your shoulder and that sort of thing. And there, and you can see they fit in there pretty well. So you can likely find plugs that are too big to fit into these recesses, but as long as the plug diameter is 10 millimeters or less, you should be good. I have here the Dana Cables Lazuli Rhapsody headphone cable, and that fits in here just fine too. And that's a pretty heavy duty cable in there as well. All right. So other than that, that's the build of the headphone. It is well constructed. It is slightly heavy, but again, the weight is distributed well, and it's made of quality materials and in a quality way, all that. So no complaints on the build there. The pads are really comfortable. They're ZMF pads, again, with that magnetic mounting system, which makes them really convenient to switch on and off with other pads that you have to order from Modhouse. Okay. What makes these headphones also unique is, yes, they are planar magnetic, but they are also very high in impedance. The single-sided version is rated at 135 ohms of impedance. They are also very low in sensitivity, with a 76 decibel per milliwatt rating and sensitivity here. The double-sided version, okay, so again, magnets on both sides of the planar magnetic membrane here, has a rated impedance of 155 ohms and a 78 decibel per milliwatt impedance. This makes them rather unique in the headphone market right now in terms of being high in impedance and low in sensitivity. Often, that's not a combination that's out there very much. Anyway, so amping these things, powering these things is something that we need to talk about. You've probably already heard well before my review that you need an amp that can push a lot of voltage to be able to drive these things, and that's true. All right, so that is something to keep in mind here. And again, I will give you some of my thoughts on amp pairings here in a little bit. Okay. But that's kind of the important stuff, I think, for build comfort, features, and specs, and so forth. So I think right there we can go ahead and pause and start turning our attention to what gear I use to test these and then get into the sound. Okay, for test gear, I used a lot of stuff. I used the stock cable. We'll just start with cables here. I also, Ryan also sent me a Viking weave. I believe this is pronounced Ansuz. Okay, A-N-S-U-Z, and I will link to this down in the description. However, there's a bit of a delay on buying this particular cable because I just checked Viking Weave's website and it says that there is a Mark II of this model line coming, but the price is listed at 419 euro. Okay, but this is a copper, an oxygen-free copper here. That is a little on the longish side. Looks like it's about 2 meters and all of that, but this is a very nice cable. That I tried on here too, and I thought that it was a little bit smoother and more tonally balanced than the stock cable. All right, and I know that's going to be a controversial statement for some, but you know what? It's really a science thing. You are putting electromagnetic energy through a physical conductor. The properties of those physical conductors are going to change how that traveling signal behaves, and yes, sometimes that can be audible. Okay. Other cables I tried would be the Lavra Cable Grand Silver line for HiFiMan. That fit in there pretty well. And then I also mentioned the Dana Cable's Lazuli Rhapsody. Okay, source gear on this. I would have listened to basically all digital files, either lossless or high-res FLAC files or DSD files. The FLACs would have been local or streamed via Qobuz. The DSD would have been all local. Generally through Roon, and for Roon endpoints, I used my Sonor Ultra Rendu streamers that would have been routed through Singer SU6 DDC, and then to various DACs, which I will name in a moment, or my Cord 2Go streamer, also as a Roon endpoint, which would have been input directly into the matching Hugo 2 transportable DAC amp, which I would have used just as a DAC for the purposes of this review. Okay. Other DACs used along the way would include the Musician Pegasus 2, which I have in for review, my Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC, which I use as my reference, and then I also have in right now the Ferrum Vandla with a Hypsos power supply. Amplifiers, and this list is big, so I'm going to name the amplifiers first of all. Then I will talk about sound impressions that I collected across listening to that range of amplifiers. Then we'll come back and we'll talk about amp pairings, and then finally we'll get to where these fit in the market, which means comparisons with other headphones. Okay, bear with me. The list is extensive, in no particular order. These things got meaningful time on the Vielectric HPA V222, Vielectric HPA V281, HiFiMan Golden Wave Prelude, Ferrum Ore with Hypsos, Shitmolnir 3, KN HA1A Mark II, Headamp GSX Mini, Lake People G111 Mark II, LTA MZ3, Urzatich Perfidus, Niche Pietus Maximus, and ZMF Homage. General sound impressions. Let's start with these. The two headphones sound a little bit different, the single-sided and the double-sided. They have their own unique sound signatures and sound profiles. Let's start with the cheaper one here with the single-sided version. This one is a little bit warmer in its perceived frequency response. So I would call it like a neutral warm kind of signature. The tonal balance on this, meaning the relationship between fundamental frequencies and their harmonics, is reasonably okay. It is not standout. I did think that this one tended a little bit towards sibilance in the consonant range, even on an amp that was good for it, a little bit more than some other models that I have heard in the price range. But generally speaking, the tonal balance is at least decent, but again, trending a little bit more towards warmth. The presentation on this one is a little bit more on the dynamic side as well. There's a little bit of sub-bass slam and impact on this one. Not a lot, but it is noticeable to the point where it's like one of the features of the sound. This one's a little bit more warm and punchy. The soundstage on it is not particularly big, nor is it claustrophobic or could it be described as intimate. It's just kind of in the middle, being what it needs to be more often than not. The imaging and separation on it are okay. They are not stellar. The depth of the sound field here is just kind of middling as well for a headphone of its price. What does come out with this one though is that it has a really like natural and kind of organic sound to it. It just has like this lush kind of just kind of like what like some ZMFs and some Odysseys, like the LCD2 line and all of that, at least the old LCD2 pre-phaser was known for. Like a little bit warmer, punchier, but it just has like this lush kind of organic, kind of natural presentation to its sound, to its timbre and that sort of thing. So that I thought was a standout feature for this one at that price as well. Okay, so my overall take on the single-sided version here with its sonic profile and its technical proficiency is that it's solid. It is not mind-blowing to me. It is not poor. It does not seem deficient for the price, but I do think that you can outdo this one, at least in terms of the technical proficiency, the resolution, the imaging, the separation, that kind of thing. Like you can do better at the price, but it does have that just natural kind of listenable, lay back and enjoy the music kind of quality that not every headphone in this price range has either. Okay. Some comments on the sound on the double-sided version then. Of the two tungstens here, this one has the more neutral overall perceived frequency response. I tried really hard to come up with a frequency range that I thought was either above or below what I would normally perceive as neutral, and I couldn't really find it with any kind of consistency in there too. So I think this one does a pretty good job of just playing it right down the middle in terms of being mostly neutral in its frequency response. It also is like very good in clarity. Like this has just a very clean and clear sound to it. It does kind of trade that, in lieu of having that kind of natural organic kind of lushness that the single-sided version does, like this one is just a little bit cleaner and has more clarity. So it sounds more technical in nature than the single-sided version does. But the tonal balance on it is very good. Where the single-sided one could get a little bit sibilant, this one's sibilance was just an utter rarity. I thought the tonal balance on this one, meaning the relationship between fundamental frequencies and their harmonics, again, is excellent. Just, it's very tonally smooth. I don't necessarily mean presentationally smooth overall, although it does have some of that too, but just the tonal balance on this and just the overall tonality is just very smooth and very well done. All right, so then the presentation on this, I already alluded to a little bit more, like it's a little bit more technical sounding in its presentation than its sibling model. But not to a fault. Like it's there, it doesn't have quite like the organic and lush kind of sound that its sibling does, but like I really only notice that when I like switch back and forth between the two. If I hear just this on its own and not listen to other headphones, I don't really notice that quality. It mostly gets out of the way and presents the music in that way. But it is detectable, again, if you are doing a quick switch to another headphone that has a little bit more organic and lush kind of presentation to it. The soundstage here, again, is not particularly big, but again, nor is it small. This one is more holographic than its sibling model, though. And you particularly notice that in the depth dimension, where you do start to get a better sense of layering in this dimension. It is more accurate in its imaging and its separation laterally, but again, it's really in the depth dimension where this one steps up above its sibling model. This one is also far more resolving than the single-sided, and it is fair to say far more resolving. There's just more details of the sound that comes out with this headphone than the single-sided version. So the double-sided magnet structure here is exerting more control over the motion of those planar magnetic driver membranes here and squeezing out more detail than the single-sided version gets. Okay. A standout trait of this one, I want to come back to its tonality for a moment. What this headphone does really well, and I mean really well, is treble smoothness. cymbal crashes on this one are just so well and naturally balanced. Hit a cymbal, like on so many headphones, there will be a peak or a shimmer or something in there, and this one just very rarely ever has that trait. And to me, that might be like the really big sonic feature that comes out of this one that honestly, like, we'll get to comparisons in a little bit, but it's hard to find better right now on the market at any price in that one particular performance trait than the double-sided tungsten here. I just really loved how natural sounding the tuning and the tonality was on cymbal crashes. Not necessarily hi-hats, but things like crash and ride cymbals and that sort of thing. They just sound really, really spectacular on this headphone. That doesn't mean that everything else sounds bad. It's just that that particular thing really stands out on this one. So if you're a treble head that just really likes the sound of good natural treble, then check this one out on an amp that handles it well. Now, outside of that particular issue, that like the timbre on this one and like the natural sound is good, it is competent, it does not stand out in any way, at least not to my ear. The dynamics on this one, I mentioned how the single-sided version had a little bit of punch to it. The dynamics on this one are not as aggressive as the single-sided version is. So this one is more about resolution and like just having that kind of technical proficiency to it, whereas the single-sided version is just a little bit more fun, I would say, in its presentation. It's not that this one is devoid of dynamics, but it's not a standout trait of this one. So it's a little bit more physically and like you know, dynamically laid back in its presentation in there as well. Okay, I do also think the resolution on this is very good. I think, I said it's better than that one, but like room reverbs come out really well. Ghost notes on snare drum hits come out really well, and so forth. Like, it's got strong resolution on it. Okay, and I said at the top of the video, I think this is probably, in terms of price to performance ratio, the second best value you can get for a $2,000 US headphone. More on that when we get to comparisons here in just a moment. Okay, so those are kind of my general thoughts on the sound of just these two units on their own and in comparison to each other. Okay, let's talk amp pairings for these, because again, they are a bear to drive. And if you remember my amp list from just a moment ago, I tried amplifiers that range from about $500 US in the niche Pietis Maximus up to a little bit over $3,000 US when you're looking at the Ferrum Ore with its Hypsos power supply. Let's kind of go through this. Like, I'll kind of put these amplifiers in groupings in terms of like, do they work well, kind of middling, and then they work really well. Let me just start with, here are the amps that I just simply do not recommend. They just don't have the output power, the drive to handle these. LTA MZ3, that one's $3,700. So I tried a $3,700 US amp, but MZ3 can't do it. Urzatich Perfidus can't do it either. Okay, those, and then I'm also going to put the niche Pietis Maximus in there. Now, the MZ3 and the Perfidus were audibly distorting, getting to any kind of volume level with either of these. The Pietis Maximus was a little bit different insofar as like it actually had a fair amount of control over particularly the double-sided version here, but I would have to max out the volume pot. And then it was still only giving me about 68 dB average sound, which is listenable, average volume I should say, which is listenable, but not like reference level, get lost in the music kind of level, I think, for most of the people who are going to watch this channel here. So you probably could, I think when I used that one, I was probably using one of the internal DAC cards too, which basically is a line level signal. So, but you're really pushing that amp past a place where it's comfortable, I think, if you're trying to get by with the Pietis Maximus there. Okay, kind of this middle category here of amps that you might get away with powering these headphones here with some music genres and with some DACs. Let me unpack that a little bit further. The amps that I'm about to put in this category, for me, I would not recommend them as your primary headphone amp for these headphones. You're pushing the amp to its absolute maximum to be able to get anything useful out of it is one issue. And the second issue for these is like, I cannot just pick any piece of music from this planet. I mean, with music streaming these days, we have basically the music of Earth on demand, okay? And so we can listen to almost anything that we want to at basically any time that we want to. To say that an amplifier handles a load well, I think means that I should be able to pick any of the songs of Earth and trust that it's going to perform well with that amp and headphone or amp and speaker combination, if that's what the case may be. And with this group that I'm about to name, what I would observe is like you're pushing the amp to the max, but then you can also find tracks where you start to get a lot of harshness. The integrity of the spatial presentation starts to collapse, and like some of the details start getting lost and all that, and then fatigue can set in very quickly, even at normal listening levels. Okay, so for me, those amplifiers include the Headamp GSX Mini, the Schiit Molnir 3, and the ZMF Homage. Okay, those, again, all three of those amps, you're probably going to hear people out there saying that they sound great, they sound wonderful with tungsten, they push tungsten just fine. And there are times where I think that is true. Particularly if you have a DAC that has variable output level and you can go beyond the 4.4 volt standard output for a balanced connection, or the 2.2 volt, or is it 2.4 volt? Anyway, the roughly 2 volt output for a single-ended RCA connection. If you have a DAC or a preamp that can give you a little bit of gain on that end, you give those amps that I just named, again, the GSX Mini, the ZMF Homage, and the Schiit Molnir 3, you give them more of a chance to sound good with these headphones with a wider range of music. But on each one of those three, even like I used my Hugo 2, which is over there, basically maxed its output level out, which I don't know what the voltage output is on that, but it's greater than the 4.4 volts. I also know that my Berkeley Alpha Series 2 can max out at 6.15 volts output when its volume is maxed out, and so I tried that too with some of these combinations as well. And all that really did is just delay the inevitable, or just expand slightly the music genres and the proportion of tracks on this planet, music tracks on this planet, that those amps can sound okay with these headphones. But I would not recommend them as your primary amp for these headphones, because if you pick up something like the 1812 Overture, it goes to crap really quick, right? You start to lose your spatial presentation integrity. They get very harsh, very sharp, very fatiguing to my ear, all of that. And again, you are just absolutely pushing those amps as far as they can possibly go, okay, which is not always a good thing. So those, now, to me, that puts them on the no list, again, because I want to be able to listen to the 1812 Overture, or The Poet and the Pendulum by Nightwish, or even something that you wouldn't think would be super challenging, but Pain by The War on Drugs has a lot going on in it. It's a pretty demanding track. Like, those kind of tracks just get a little bit mushy, and that sort of thing. And again, they lose their spatial integrity, and I found that fatigue, even at my normal listening levels, would set in very quickly through those amps with these headphones, okay? I know that I might have sounded a little bit repetitive there and kind of really beat that dead horse on that one, but I know there's a lot of disagreement out there on some of those that I just named, particularly the Molnir 3 on that, so I thought it was important for me to explain why I am saying that. Okay. That leaves actually a fair number of amps that I had on hand that did pretty well with these. And the good news is not all of them are super expensive. Lake People G111 Mark II If you up the input voltage, which involves removing the lid, okay, if you up the input gain, I should say, remove the lid, get to the dip switches in there, and you set it to a plus 18, or engage both the plus 18 and the plus 6 dip switches to get up to a plus 24 dB pre-gain, then actually that little amp drove these, both of them, pretty well. Had a lot of control. Like you could tell, I mean, it didn't sound as good as some of the amps that I'm going to name here in just a moment, but that's a $550 amp as compared to, you know, a multi-$1,000 amp, which I'm going to name here shortly. Okay, so I think that also helps with the value proposition of these headphones, because again, there's a $550 amp out there that if you're willing to open its cover and up its input gain, it does a pretty bang up job with these headphones. Okay, another one that's not crazy expensive would be the $999 US KN HA1A Mark II, which is a tube amp, and that thing is a beast. Huge output power, like up to 2 watts, I think, even at a 600 ohm load, like pretty insane power output on that one. And so, you know, 600 ohm load there requires a lot of voltage. It's got voltage to spare, okay, on that. So that one, my HA1A Mark II currently has in it APOS Ray 12AU7 pre-tubes, and then I believe they are Pavane, or the PS Vane, however you say that, Art Series EL84s as the power tubes. And plenty of power, lots of power there, but I think the 12AU7s from Ray, from APOS, they're the Ray tubes, they tend a little bit brighter, and particularly for the single-sided here, there was a little bit of a synergistic issue there with the brightness and some sibilance coming through. But again, I think with tube rolling, you can address some of the sibilance issues there on that KN HA1A Mark II. But I pull that one out as just like, it has plenty of power. And again, with tube rolling, you can dial it in from a synergistic perspective standpoint, most likely. Okay, next one up in the price then at $1,300 US, Vielectric HPA V222. Vielectric, if you don't know, is Lake People's more upscale and home audio focused line. So the same company, and indeed the same guy that designed Friedream, the same guy who designed the G111 Mark II, also designed the HPA V222, and that one, fortunately, the gain switches are on the back, and I found that as long as you set the input gain on that one with just the plus 12 switch on that one, that it was plenty. It had good control, really good sound through each of these here. Lake People / Vielectric, very good at pushing voltage demanding loads, and no exception there. HPA V222 gets an easy recommendation from me driving these headphones. Up next in price for ones that worked well would be the HiFiMan Golden Wave Prelude. Now, this one had plenty of power, was not necessarily the greatest synergistic match to my ear. And an interesting thing on this one too is with the stock cable, I thought that the combination of Prelude and stock cable injected some sibilance and some upper mid-range forwardness that put some shoutiness and honkiness, and got fatiguing to me from the Prelude into particularly the double-sided version there. But the Ansuz cable and the Lavra cables Grand Silver and the Lazuli Rhapsody, all that, smoothed all that out pretty well, and then it sounded good. Now, I didn't think the Prelude was the best amp that I have in-house right now from terms of a synergistic perspective. It wasn't quite as resolving or as holographic or as dynamic as some of the other amps that I have, but I didn't get the sense that it was lacking in power. It was just kind of, it just wasn't the best match there. Moving up, the next most expensive one right there coming up would be the $2,800 Vielectric HPA V281. The best amp that I have on hand for these headphones. Take the V222 and what it was strong with, and just take it up a couple of notches. More holographic spatial presentation, more dynamic impact in the low end, okay? More detail retrieval, better resolution, more natural tonality and timbre to it. Best amp I have on hand for these headphones, period, okay? And then that leaves the Ferrum Ore with the Hypsos. That one also very smooth, very well controlled, very refined sound. The only complaint that I would have on that one as compared to what the V281 was doing is that it's just not very dynamic. The Ore is not a particularly hard-hitting, impactful amplifier generally, unless you plug in a HiFiMan Susvara for whatever reason, okay? That comes alive dynamically on that one. But otherwise, it's just a more dynamically laid-back presentation of an amp. And particularly with the double-sided version here, this one you could use some help with the low-end dynamics in particular. So it just sounded a little bit dynamically shy to me, okay, from the Ferrum Ore. But again, plenty of control, plenty of resolution, plenty of holography, plenty of refinement from the Ore and Hypsos stack there too. So there are some basic thoughts on amp pairings for these. They are a bear for an amplifier to handle, but fortunately, there are some amps, even in lower pricing, that will drive these reasonably well, which I think does help with their value proposition. So then real quick here, like, where would I recommend these? Like, in terms, now that we've talked about amps, let's just do a quick thoughts here on like, if you have an amplifier, say, like, let's draw a line at about that $1,300 price point there. This one, the double-sided, is more resolving and scales way up higher. Like, it keeps giving you more and more resolution and that sort of thing as source gear improves. The single-sided version does not scale up as high, okay? The natural and organic sound can come through more on the single-sided version too, as amp quality improves as well. Like, a lot of that natural and organic kind of quality to it that the single-sided had that the double-sided didn't was mostly heard on lesser expensive amps, but particularly the V281 brought in a fair dose of that natural and organic sound for the double-sided that got closer to what this one was doing, but never quite got all of the way there. Okay, so if you were sitting with a G111 Mark II or like the HA1A Mark II, okay, that sort of thing, then I preferred the warmer and more natural sound of the single-sided version with those amps. Both of them drive both of these competently, but I liked, again, just the more natural and organic and warmer and more dynamic sound that this one gave me on those cheaper amps. But step up to the Prelude, the V281, the Ore, and then I definitely preferred the sound of this one. HPA V222 could go either way, okay, on that one. So there was just some more thoughts there on like comparing these two, and then also like comparing them with amp pairings involved as well. Now let's compare the Tungstens to other headphones around their price and of their type. To talk about where these fit into the market, and then also like what is their value proposition. Let's start with the single-sided version here, which I will just go ahead and stick on my head here. And then the two that I have to compare on hand to compare them to, which I think are the references kind of in that middle of the $1,000 price bracket there, would be the two HiFiMans here. The Arya Organic, which is $1,300 US, and the HE1000 Stealth Magnet Edition, which originally had that name of HE1000 V2 Stealth Magnet Edition, so it's essentially the HE1000 V3, right? And so this one is $1,400 US. These are both, again, big open back planar magnetic driver headphones. They are significantly easier to drive than the Tungstens are, though. So they are much lower in impedance and much higher in sensitivity than either of these. So these two are more amp friendly from a power standpoint than the Tungstens are. So that's an important place to start. Now, in terms of sonics, comparing these two to the single-sided Tungsten, because I think that's the most appropriate price level comparison here. Both of these have a more complete and overall higher level of technical ability, especially the HE1000, but just a little bit the Arya Organic 2. Both of these are more resolving. The Arya by just a little bit, the HE1000 by a fairly noticeable degree. Both of these will also soundstage larger. Now, soundstage size is not a measure of technical ability or good versus bad, better versus worse kind of thing. That's very much a preference thing. But where these separate themselves there is not only that soundstage size, but it is also the holography of the spatial presentation, particularly, again, the HE1000 sounds much more three-dimensional and does a better job in the depth dimension, whereas the Arya is a little bit better in the depth dimension, but also noticeably better laterally and all of that. Both of these also can rival the Tungsten in terms of that like natural and organic kind of sound, and they are both yet more a little bit more dynamic and impactful in their sound. So I do think that these two are the overall better buys and better values than the Tungsten. I'm also going to add that particularly with classical music, or orchestral music I should say, in there, so classical movie soundtracks, you know, just anything orchestral and acoustic, the HE1000 Stealth Magnet Edition really separates itself from both of these two, actually, in that particular music. So if that is your jam, I would look into this one in here. Now, all is not lost there at this price. Okay, so yes, there are better deals out there sonically, and in terms of amp friendliness, they are here at the price. But the size of the HiFiMans here, like if you have a smaller head, this can be too big and it can break the seal on the side of the head, right? The way that pad is. So if you are of smaller head, this one might be a better fit in that regard there too. So that's something to think about. Also, the HiFiMans can be a little bit treble heavy for some. That is a common complaint. Now, if you are having treble issues with a HiFiMan headphone, it is most often, I would say 80+% of the time, a signal chain issue. You can assemble a piece of source gear, a DAC or a preamp, and an amplifier and cabling. All of that matters in there to get that treble under control and make it not peaky or shimmery, okay, and less fatiguing. But they are just brighter tuned headphones generally, okay? Like they are smooth in the treble, you can get them to smooth out, but you may not be able to move the overall level. These are a little bit less treble forward. So if you are treble sensitive and there's just not a signal chain on this earth that's going to help you with the HiFiMans, this one is still technically strong. Like it is a good sounding headphone and could be an option for you there. But I hesitate to give this one a full-on glowing recommendation just because I know that there are better packages, better and more complete and more amplifier-friendly packages at the price point here that are also more readily available, right? Like these are still kind of on back order, and there's a lag time for them where you can order one of these and have it there in just a few days, kind of a thing, at least right now as of the filming of this video in March of 2024. Okay, now don't take that to mean that I don't like or that I don't enjoy the single-sided Tungsten. I do. I just honestly cannot tell you that it is the best value in that middle $1,000 tier of headphones right now. And then you have that it has a very high amp demand on top of that. Okay. The double-sided version here. I did a fair number of comparisons to this one because there is chatter out there on the interwebs that the double-sided version is like a baby Susvara. It gives the HiFiMan Susvara a run for its money, or it's like, you know, 90% of Susvara or whatever. Like there's a lot of talk about that kind of thing. So the first thing that I did was compare it to another HiFiMan around, which is the HE1000 SE. This one was the one that was initially $3,500 US when it was launched and is now available for $2,000 even, $19.99, but $2,000 US even. Also much easier to drive than the double-sided version, so therefore more amplifier friendly from a power and drivability standpoint. You still have the issue of the HiFiMan treble presentation here and the fitment of it. Like, it can be too big. It's the same chassis as the other two, the Arya Organic and the HE1000 Stealth that I just showed you there. So if you have the small head issue, that's still going to be an issue here. And again, like the treble, you can smooth it out and make it more natural in its presentation with signal chains, the whole thing, source, DAC, amp, cabling, all of that. You can get it dialed in, but there's still just going to be a fair amount of it on this one. So that's a thing to keep in mind, where the treble on this one is smoother. The one area that again stands out about the double-sided tungsten here in comparison to the HE1000 SE and indeed just about everything else that I have heard here is that the smoothness of cymbal hits through that range of the treble on the double-sided tungsten is amazing. It is excellent, okay? About as good as I have heard, short of something insane like the HiFiMan Shangri-La, okay? It's not close to that, not close to that, but probably a distant second best based on what I have been able to hear. So better than this one on that performance metric there. However, the resolution, the holography, the dynamic impact, the naturalness, the organic nature of the sound and in the timbre and all of that on the HE1000 SE doesn't far outclass, but is a little bit higher than what the double-sided tungsten can deliver. So to me, this is why I called the double-sided tungsten quite possibly the second best headphone value at $2,000 US. And that's because even though this one here, the HE1000 SE, might be cheating because it was initially a $3,500 headphone and is now slashed to $2,000, we live in a world where this costs $2,000 US right now, and you can have it in your house just a few short days after ordering it. Whereas this one, the tungsten, will take a little bit to get there anymore. Hopefully that production speeds up here. And then again, that amplifier demand. HE1000 SE might be a little bit on the amp picky side in that treble. Not terribly so, but it's noticeable. Okay. But this one has a much higher amplifier demand from a power output standpoint, particularly voltage, that makes it less amplifier pairing friendly overall than the HE1000 SE is. Okay, but both of these headphones scale up with source gear amazingly well. That is a strength of the double-sided tungsten, is that as source gear improves, this one keeps getting better and better and better. This one also keeps getting better and better and better. So I would personally put the HE1000 SE, the complete package, even though I think this one is a little bit better on treble timbre and treble tonality. Okay, you know, they both get much better as signal chains go up with the HE1000 SE running just in front. So again, combine that aspect where it's just slightly higher performing. It's available now, and it's a little bit less amplifier demanding, maybe a lot of bit less amplifier demanding. I think that the HE1000 SE right now at $2,000 is the better overall value for most people, unless again, it's just too much trouble for you and it's just too big to fit your head than this one. Okay, other comps that I did. That one right there, Meze Empyrean 2, just came in a couple short days ago, so not a super detailed comparison, but so far, and I reserve the right to walk this back as I get to know that headphone, the MP2 a little bit better. It's $3,000 US, also a big planar driver in it, but I think this one actually overall outperforms that one. The MP2 probably is a little bit better on that like natural and organic kind of trait to the presentation and might be a little bit wider in soundstage, but I was picking up more soundstage depth from the Tungsten. I was also getting more resolution from the Tungsten, and again, that treble smoothness from the Tungsten. I'm going to keep coming back to that really truly is a standout trait of the Tungsten here, and definitely a noticeable improvement over the MP2. But that review is coming up in the near future, where hopefully I can flesh out this comparison just a little bit more. My personal top-of-the-line reference headphones: original Focal Utopia, HiFiMan Susvara. How does the double-sided Tungsten compare to these? Because particularly with the Susvara, the Tungsten is being compared to favorably. Not many people saying it's better, but that it gets really close. And there are some similarities. We'll come back to that here in just a moment. I do want to start with Utopia, just to keep going like upward in price here. And the Utopia is interesting here. So first of all, Utopia is going to be, it's a dynamic driver, so there's that, but it also has a more dynamic and impactful kind of presentation to it than the Tungsten does. The resolution and the three-dimensionality of the spatial presentation on the Utopia is also a noticeable step up from the Tungsten. The ability to scale up with source gear quality is also in here, as it is with the Tungsten, so it just keeps giving you more and more and more, and then starts from a higher place to begin with. Okay, and then like, if I didn't mention it already, it's worth repeating, like the dynamic impact of this one. This is a hard-hitting, impactful, energetic sounding headphone, and this with a Tungsten just really isn't that very much. Now, the Utopia is very interesting now, particularly the original, because for a used price, at least here in the United States, one of these can be had in like the $1,600 to $2,000 US range, used and in pretty good shape. That is so much headphone quality for that money. Now, the Utopia is also incredibly amp picky, not necessarily from a power demand standpoint, but from a synergy standpoint. And when things go off the rails with the Utopia, they go off the rails in a big way. I have described it before as like, the Utopia is the headphone where if you were to ask it if you've put on a little weight, it will look at you and yell at you, "Put down the fork, you lardo." Okay? It's just very rude when something goes wrong. Okay? So that stands in contrast to the Tungsten. So the Tungsten, I would put like the Utopia and the Tungsten here on a similar level in terms of challenge of matching them to amplifiers. The Utopia because of synergy, and the Tungsten because of power demand. But when something in the signal chain or the music that you're listening to, the track that you're listening to is not very well recorded, when something is wrong in the signal chain or in the track that you're listening to, the Utopia just fixates on it and pushes it at you and can make your life miserable. The flip side of that is when everything is going right, Utopia sings beautifully, and in a way only this one, in my opinion, can really compete with, okay, or outdo, I should say, okay, but a lot has to go right to get it there. The Tungsten is more graceful. If a recording is sibilant, okay, or a little bit mid-range forward, for example, the smoothness and just like this one is more gentle about it. It is not as fatiguing with that. It makes poorer recordings still sound listenable and enjoyable, and not because it's significantly lacking in resolution. It's not. It's got very good resolution and all that. It's just the presentation of all of that is smooth and sweet and forgiving, okay, which I think is a strength of the Tungsten, all of that there too. That part of it, the sweetness, the gentleness of it when things go wrong, it does share, is a trait it shares with the Susvara. The Susvara is like that. The Susvara, like the Utopia, and much like what the Tungsten can do there, will point out the flaws in a recording and in your signal chain with very little effort, okay? It'll just say, yep, it's right there. But it does it in a sweet way and in a way that's not overly distracting and can still allow you to enjoy the music. Where, you know, Utopia is just stabbing ear daggers down your ear canal, okay? These are much more gentle in their approach. The Tungsten here will outdo both of these, at least both the Utopia and the Susvara, at least on the signal chain gear that I have. It will outdo these two in that treble tonality and smoothness thing. Like those cymbal sounds, again, sound so good on the Tungsten. But everything else, the Susvara has more resolution. It has more dynamic impact on a wider range of amplifiers. Okay? It has a more three-dimensional spatial presentation to it, more holography to it, and all of that sort of thing. There's a little bit more texturing to the sound than the Tungsten does. And then the Susvara also has that natural and organic kind of quality to its timbre and to its overall sound. Like, it just has that quality for days. I've said when I reviewed this one, it's the most natural sounding headphone I have ever heard, until I heard the Shangri-La anyway, and that remains true minus the Shangri-La, okay? That it's still the most natural and organic headphone that I have heard. That is not particularly a strength of the Tungsten, that natural and organic kind of quality to it. You can get some of it with signal chain quality, again, like my V281 brought it out, all of that. More so, but it's just not going to catch Susvara in that particular trait. Okay, to do this comparison, to be clear, I tried both of these on both the V281 and the Prelude. I thought that the Susvara just moderately outperformed the Tungsten on the V281. It was a very big gap on the Prelude. So it was clear to me that the V281 was the better headphone for, or the better amp for the Tungsten, and the Prelude was the better amp for the Susvara. So that's where I did a lot of my comparing there, and was able to just like use the same cable because they're both 3.5 millimeter, just switch them back and forth and all of that to at least keep that variable down. But again, like the traits that I just mentioned there, like just trying to do it on an amp where either of these are happy, like the performance ceiling of the Susvara is still much higher than what the Tungsten does. But again, the Tungsten, I think, at least on the gear that I have, is just better at that one thing than the Susvara in that treble smoothness and cymbal hits just sounding amazing. But they both scale up very well and all of that. So is the Tungsten a baby Susvara? I hesitate to call it that because they do have different natures in their sound. They share the trait of that gentleness and sweetness when signal chain problems are there or it's a bad recording. But other than that, like the Susvara really does assert its superiority in a lot of ways, as it should, because, you know, it costs basically 3 times what the Tungsten does. All right. So let's wrap this up. Do I like the Modhouse Tungstens? Yes, I do. They are enjoyable listening experiences. They come with their quirks in terms of you need to put some work into figuring out what amplifier is going to drive them and so forth. The single-sided version, I would say, is a solid but not spectacular, like middle $1,000 kind of headphone. You can get better overall technical presentations for near the same price that are more amplifier friendly and are more readily available. So the value proposition on the single-sided version is just not particularly great, but it does have its own kind of unique sound and presentation that I think some people will like and will be looking for. And it also has like a less fatiguing, at least in the treble presentation, that someone who is super treble sensitive may be attracted to as well. The double-sided Tungsten here is a really excellent headphone. It is very, very close in its overall technical proficiency to the now $2,000 HE1000 SE, just behind it in most areas, except for that treble smoothness where the Tungsten pulls ahead. But the value on the Tungsten is not quite what the HE1000 SE is right now, because again, The availability of this one isn't there. There's a lag time on it. And then also it is just the power demand. It is very amplifier demanding in a way that the HE1000 SE is not. But the double-sided tungsten is still a heck of a lot of headphone performance at $2,000. The HE1000 SE right now kind of warps the market at that price point because, again, it was a $3,500 headphone that is now $2,000. So you can argue that it's an unfair comparison, but it is realistic because you can get this for $2,000 brand new right now. The only other thing that could possibly be of more value right now would be a used Focal Utopia there at around that same price. You have to be willing to buy used. You have to wait for one to come along. Similar amp pickiness, at least in terms of, like, again, just synergistic, okay, or at least similar amp matching problems to Tungsten, just for different reasons with the Utopia though, so that is there to be considered as well. But probably the second best headphone value out there for a $2,000 US dollar. I think it probably is going to end up holding up that it outperforms the Empyrean 2, which is a $3,000 US dollar headphone, for example, okay? So it is still a heck of a lot of headphone performance for the money. So good job, Ryan, at Modhouse. These are good to excellent headphones. I enjoyed getting to know them. You're clearly onto something with this base design. I am looking forward to what you can come up with future revisions of these, because I think you are heading somewhere really cool. All right, thank you all for watching. I know this was a long one, and I know this was hotly anticipated and all of that. So please remember to like if you haven't, subscribed to the channel if you haven't, leave comments down below, check out my PayPal, check out my Patreon. Generally look for ways to support the channel. Thanks again for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.